I can't believe I got to drive all the way to my vacation just to have to turn around and drive back a few hours later. I mean, so much for relaxing, right? Well, I knew something big had happened when security was rushing me into the prep room. They pretty much just threw me on my gear and dragged me into the chamber. My awareness was up really high as I was wondering if they wanted me gone so they were going to have to misjump me or something. My concerns were pushed away as I could see several other jumpers getting ready as well. In total, there were 5 of us strapping on our gear and making hasty double checks to make sure everything was working. As we did, so we kept asking what the hell was wrong. The techs were far too busy to talk to us, and the rest of them just kept their mouths shut. Eventually, one of the guys, I'll call E, got pissed off and grabbed one of the people that had handed us our cameras. He insisted on knowing what the emergency was, or he wasn't going through the damn portal for the jump. The rest of us must have been thinking the same thing because we gripped our weapons as we stood there waiting for an answer. The guy tried to break E's grip, at least until one of security grabbed E and we all drew up. The room fell silent for a few moments before one of the techs spoke up. "It's a rescue mission!" she yelled. We all looked confused as though to ask why they didn't just tell us that in the first place. The doors to the jump room slammed open as 4 more people came rushing in. They immediately stopped dead in their tracks, seeing the tension in the room, and we all recognized the first one through the door since he usually gave us our mission briefs. Thankfully, he began to fully explain what the hell was going on. Shortly after I had left, they had figured out the problem with the machine. The reason I had jumped so far from my start point, that is, our most senior jumpers was first to go, but he was going to make a 70-year jump like I did. I had to ask them why they jumped so early. I mean, I did bring back a lot of samples for them to dissect. Well, it turns out they wanted to get a sample from the other creature I saw charging the house. It was supposed to be an hour-long jump to kill the thing, get the samples, and get back. However, whoever can guess what's going to happen. We had some questions like loadouts and such. Turns out that idiot jumped carrying only non-lethals, except for one rifle. Seriously, he did not watch the video of what I killed, did he? And this second one looked even bigger. We reevaluated what we were carrying, and most of us brought some very heavy ordnance, or made it heavier. I do have to pause and explain everything. When you perform the jump with this machine, you have to jump solo. If you try to jump more than one at a time, you risk merging everyone together. For example, the last female to jump was holding the hand of a fellow jumper having to perform an emergency retrieval. Their arms merged almost to the elbow, and their features became distorted due to whom or whatever was chasing them being partially imprinted into their backs. I saw the footage that they both tumbled down the ramp screeching in pain. Whatever had merged into their backs was enough that the male half of the duo was dead in a few seconds, where she screamed and thrashed on the ground for over a minute before expiring herself. Because of this, new safety procedures were put in place. Even though others have jumped together, in one instance carries another one on his back, and there was no massive trauma in it, it was enough that everyone to take some precautions very, very seriously. Oh, and as for the couple that went through and died, since it was a 210-year jump, the Phoenix Protocol was enacted. A single message was sent back to an hour before the scheduled jump. It's always just a piece of paper with a message telling them to scrub the jump. We have actually lost a good tech over this because as soon as he yelled to scrub the jump, the paper disintegrated into nothing into his hands. Apparently, he got the shakes so bad that he couldn't do his job anymore, so they fired him. Supposedly, he was working for a telecom company in Europe now. Now back to the jump, of course. The other 4 in the jump besides me were E, L, R, and F. Obviously, I'm using code. E wanted to go first as he carried a 50 caliber Barrett rifle. He always wanted to go for, as he put it, big game hunting, but this was as close as he was going to get. We watched him jump and we waited 30 seconds before the next one. This was to allow E to get away from the distortion bubble. It wouldn't kill him, but it sure doesn't feel good either. Don't ask how I know that. I was the second to last one to jump and immediately ran forward, linking up with the other three, right before we could feel the air move around us due to the distortion as the next one jumped in. I looked across the field with abject horror at what was in front of me. The house had been torn apart, not just pushed over, but it was like the house had exploded from within a seeming ignition point. Once we had everyone, we began to make our way to the house. R had to remind us to turn our cameras on since we only had one on each of us as we jumped. A new protocol to keep them from burning up on the jump, of course. I was really glad that they were all prior service and combat arms to boot. I really didn't want to go into a situation like this with someone who's greener than the grass we were walking across. We kept our weapons up as we walked to the house. Since I was the last one here, L asked me if it was this quiet when I was here last. Then I told him it was, and I could feel the pucker factor go up by at least twice as much. Before we even got to the house, we knew what had happened. The smell of busted guts was all over the place, a telltale sign that someone or something had died recently. We began to move around the house, where I was focused on the tree line. E said, "Hey, I thought you had killed one of those things right here." That's when I looked, and sure enough, the carcass was gone. We looked, and there were no drag marks, just a lot of blood. R looked disgusted and said, "Oh, fuck, they ate it." I couldn't dispute that, since the only solid piece we found was some carapace shards. How they broke into small enough pieces to eat, I'm not sure I wanted to find out right now. We continued to search the property. The electric fence had been disturbed, but not taken down. We rallied into the barn after checking to see if there was anything or anyone left. When we got to the barn, we were surprised to see some livestock were still alive. They all started to make noise, which I knew was a very bad idea, because they had not been fed in a few days. We quickly took care of them to go and make them quiet by shoving some hay in their faces. Once they started to quiet down, we could hear a pop and a distorted howl. Rushing to the windows, we could see it. That thing I saw before must have heard the animals and come running for its next meal. Too bad for it, the fence was still electrified. As a couple of the guys made fun of it, I was just glad it couldn't get in. That is when I heard another pop and a similar howl from our far left. I quick checked and showed that there was another, only slightly smaller, one testing the fence. One we could handle easy, but two would be another thing entirely. Things just got worse as we could see smaller creatures come running out of the forest, bipedal and really fast. They looked similar to dinosaurs from that first Park movie. They were smaller, though, with 4 instead of 2 arms. They began to attack the two creatures in a type of feeding frenzy. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would have thought somebody was on a bad acid trip if they had told me what I was just seeing. The multi-legged creatures pulled together with a third one that came from the far side. They began to fight the horde of bipedal whatever in the hell those were. The bipedal ones seemed to have some nasty sharp teeth since they were able to dig in deep into the creature's legs, tails, and necks. However, the big ones seemed to be a little bit smarter and focused on the attacking ones that were coming in against their brethren. It was totally unreal. During this chaos, I heard L say, "What the hell?" And I looked to see he had binoculars up. I pulled mine out and looked, and I could see the jumper we had come to recover running towards the retrieval point. He wasn't carrying any gear, not weapons, no vest, and I didn't even see a camera chest mount. I did see his retrieval beacon in hand. I checked my gear and I could figure out why he couldn't see him on our GPS. I watched as that crazy fool jumped. Well, mission complete, I guess. Now to get out of our own mess. The different creatures were still tearing each other to pieces, literally. One of the smaller multi-legged ones was already out as the bipedal ones were eating it alive. Those non-feasting on this thing were still trying to take down the other two, and doing a decent job of it too. The multi-legged ones' best advantage were their hard carapace and that lethal head. If it got any of those running things in its mouth, it was immediately crushed and basically inhaled. It's like a giant snapping turtle. It was as though the jaw unhinged and the tongue pulled it inside. If it didn't have enough time to do that, it just bit the damn thing in half. It was disgusting, and it smelled so much worse. After a few minutes, there were only one of those big creatures still going, and maybe 25% of the small creatures left. It was weird as the fight just seemed to end, and both sides began to gorge themselves on the remains of the fallen. That is when I found out what happened to that shell. The last big one got a big mouthful and with an unworldly crack broke off a piece and crunched it like a lizard eating a large bug. The sounds were far beyond disturbing, though hearing F puke in the corner was just as bad. Serves you right for eating a big meal right before a jump. We all decided to wait until they were done and sneak away to the recovery point. This was a good plan, but you know what they say about the best laid plans. The big one seemed to eat its fill and began to burrow itself into the ground right where it was. The only thing left above ground was most of the outer shell. After eating that much, it would need a nap, too. Though it meant we would have to make a bigger detour on the way out, but shouldn't be too much of a problem. The problem was those bipedal things. They kept sniffing around the fence and getting the occasional zap, but not giving up on the prize inside. 4 cows, a dozen chickens, and 5 adult males. I wasn't watching as E said, "Oh shit," and then turned his weapon up and yelled, "Incoming!" We then heard something big land on the roof. As it turns out, they used the shell from the other creature to allow them to jump over the fence. You clever bastards. E turned his rifle up and fired. He must have hit it because it tumbled off the roof. Before it even hit the ground, at least a half a dozen had gotten a running start and began to jump in. I turned just in time to see one run up, and the head of the big creature reached out and dragged it under like some sort of massive trapdoor spider. If I wasn't afraid before, I sure was now. In total, there had to be at least 2 dozen of those bipedal quad-armed freaks left. We took defensive positions, facing out as E and R, one carrying a 50 cal and the other carrying a 240 Golf heavy machine gun, tried to take them off the roof. They got a good chunk, but not all of them. As they started firing, we figured it would be easy to hold out. That's until the height of the landings, along with the bullets ripping through the roof, made one of them come right down in the middle of us. This was exceptionally dangerous because the high risk of fratricide, as in friendly fire, which is never friendly. It was only stunned for a moment from crashing down before it tried to take out one of the cattle. I put some 308 rounds through it, and that was that. But that wasn't the end of the attack. Like NPCs from a video game, they just ran in and would try to grab the first thing they could see. Those on the outside were trying to break down the walls while the ones still on the roof decided to drop in for a snack. L was backing up to the wall when one from the outside was able to rip through and grab him. It sunk its claws into him, and he was screaming as he tried to get it free. F saw this and was able to shoot the creature through the wall. It let L go, but he was definitely out of this fight. I had reloaded another magazine when I saw the chickens going nuts. One of these things had busted into the pen, but didn't know how elusive chickens really are. I almost laughed as I blew his head clean off. F was still covering L at this point, but needed some help. I pushed over and covered F as he patched them up. By this point, E had dropped his 50 and switched to his pistols. The pistol rounds seemed to work just fine on these things. Finally, some good news. At least L could cover himself a little bit at this point. R had run his heavy gun almost completely dry, clearing the roof, then spent the rest of the ones trying to get through the walls, and he was also down to his pistols. However, His version of a pistol was an MP5. I forgot to mention, R is a really big guy. I might have had about one magazine left as the shooting stopped. I led everyone outside and back to the recall site. We tried to take as much of what we could back, but L was our priority. Those claws had gone real deep, far beyond what our IFACs could handle. When we turned the corner of the barn, we could reach the gate. One of those things was standing defiantly in our way. It growled and sneered at us while hunched down as though it was going to charge. I put the last of my rifle rounds into it without a second thought. As we made our way out of the fence, I noticed the big creature was moving. It was like it was trying to be sneaky as it rotated its body. I told everyone we had to move, so we began to run. This freaking thing began to rise up out of the ground slowly. It was as if it wanted to intimidate us. Well, it succeeded in a glorious fashion. E tried to shoot it with his rifle, but he was now black on ammo too. This thing turned and looked at us as though it was going to enjoy running us down. It took one step and then yelled, or roared, I really can't tell. What we didn't see was a strange VTOL, vertical takeoff and landing, vehicle hover only a few hundred feet above us. It made almost no sound and had just sent a spike through this thing's back and into the ground, basically staking it in place. The spike in question was the size of, well, me actually. Oddly enough, it wasn't enough to kill the thing instantly as it thrashed to get free. We took this opportunity and ran as fast as we could, basically scared little girls straight to the retrieval point. We got to the retrieval site and sent L through first. We waited for a full minute before E went. I was the last one to go, since I was the only one with a heavy weapon that still had ammo in it. I jumped back, barely missing F on the way out, and took a really deep breath. The medics were already taking L to the aid station, while the rest of us just walked to the briefing area. The techs were a little mad we didn't get much in the way of samples, but the video footage was enough that we would not get chewed out. We sat there with a fresh cup of coffee and a large meal while we waited for news about L. It was El Doctor himself that came in with a smile on his face. He told us that aside from being stuck in recovery for about 2 weeks, he should be fine. Was close though, due to all the hemorrhaging, or should I say rapid blood loss, whichever way you want to put that. For the first time, E was the quiet one, while I was the one that got chewed out by the doc. Another high-ranking person joined us as I was saying that if they wanted to still play God with a CRISPR program, they could find someone else. The other nodded in agreement. In truth, had I been there by myself, it is doubtful that I would have made it back. That is when the doc got a weird look on his face. What? I asked. The other guy sheepishly responded, That's the kind of reason you were sent in a group. My blood ran cold, and I'm sure I had to be pale as a sheet. You mean I'm not me? I asked. He responded, No, you're you. L was the alternate timeline. We all froze because we knew what that meant. L had been lost on a mission, and they sent the message back to make sure he didn't go alone this time. We all calmed down and sat back on our chairs. I looked at the remainder of food in front of me. Before we go any further, I turned to them. Mind if we get something stronger? I raised my glass at that. The doc stayed out as the other guy left and came back a minute later with some very high-priced booze. F raised a glass. To L, for a speedy recovery. We all held our glasses up for a toast. That was probably the best drink I've ever had. Of course, one of the bonuses of owning a time machine, I guess. You can age liquor as long as you want. We continued with the debrief when one of the others brought in the recordings. We had to explain everything because the best we had for samples was blood splatter. Of course, what they pulled out of L counted too. It was still enough for those bioengineer folks to be busy for years, if not decades. We were told that because of this, all CRISPR testing had been put on hold, effective 1 week from then. If you're wondering why they would wait a week, it is so they can still analyze the samples before they fade out. It would also be a week before any other jumps. What they had was far too important to risk losing at this point. I just wondered who was buying this shit. I was so tired as I left, I contemplated just sleeping in my car. Though there was still so much going through my head, I wouldn't be finding sleep easy anytime soon. I've been around and seen some shit, but I'd never been trained for something like that. I'm just glad my men were all okay. They aren't like the family I meet when I jump, though. The family changes a lot. I mean, there are some constants for them, which is nice. I think about how I was able to save the little girl on one mission and see her happy and healthy the next. I know in reality when I'm the one that is changing, but aside from that, they are like close neighbors. Neighbors that didn't deserve what had happened to them. Just imagining what they went through with those things ripping their house apart around them. At that thought, I just had to pull the car over, open the door, and violently barf my guts out. Great, now I'm hungry again. Better get something to eat on my way back. I got a week to recover, and I'm gonna use it. I do wonder, now that the genetic fuckery is off the table, what I'm gonna see on my next jump.